Sciurus linnaeus, otherwise known as the humble tree squirrel. Peaceful, fluffy, and unassuming, but what if it wanted to consume your flesh? In today's challenge, I will be crash landing 10 colonists on a planet full of rapidly replicating killer squirrels. We have 16 days to establish a base camp before the squirrel onslaught begins. On day 17, one manhunter squirrel will spawn and attack us. The amount of squirrels that spawns doubles every day according to this graph. This may not seem threatening, but if you've passed grade 6 math, you'll know it won't take long before we're being assaulted by hundreds of squirrels every day. Our goal is to survive 28 days of Squirrel Armageddon and establish ourselves as the dominant life form on the planet. But before we can begin this challenge, I have an exciting announcement to make. For the first time in the 5-year history of this channel, we finally have an actual sponsor. And it's real this time, not like last year when I pretended to be sponsored by a sex toy company. This video is officially sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. It's the RPG PvP gaming experience of your lifetime. Available now on iOS and Android with millions of players, actually very good graphics, and constant updates. Raid is the answer to every question you've ever asked. My favorite champion? It could be Tashada. I mean, just look at those stats. Or even Madame Saris. She can support me any day. But if I'm being honest, it's Broadmaw, because it's attainable for a guy like me. I just want to get all lost up in them folds, boy, I tell you what. Sorry, what? Oh, Raid! As you can tell, love is in the air this month, and new players can participate in Raid's Valentine's-themed love quest. Just download Raid from the links below and head to the address on screen to enter your player ID and begin your personal love quest. Play the Valentine's-themed minigames for a chance to win virtual and real prizes such as Raid Champions and even Amazon gift cards up to $1,000. Additionally, everyone can use promo code SaintValentine23 to receive a Valentine's Day gift straight from me to you. Create your own unique playstyle with over 600 champions and millions of ways to customize your team. Battle countless bosses, expand your roster, and assert your masculinity by coupling your phone's power supply to your pacemaker, thus ensuring you'll always be able to play Raid Shadow Legends or else you're already dead. Click my link in the description below or scan my QR code to download Raid and receive $30 of in-game items, including 200,000 silver and free epic champion Chonaru. Thank you, Raid, for sponsoring this video. Now, let's begin. I've decided that if I'm going to commit genocide, I can at least enlist the help of some experts. So I picked my 10 starting colonists randomly from the comments section on my most recent video. With such a diverse and intimidating team, I felt as though we might actually have a chance at this. We crash landed on this alien world, 10 men against an entire planet of squirrels. Collectively, we are the can that is to be crushed. However, with a little ingenuity, we just might be able to survive. I began by surveying the area to identify the most defensible position. It was a mixture of mountainous terrain and rainforest vegetation. Not ideal, but it has potential. We have only 16 days until the Squirrel Scouts will discover us, and not long after that begins total Squirrel Armageddon, so we need to move fast. Luckily, we landed in a fairly safe position, so we'll just make our base here. We don't actually have enough time to develop a fully functional colony, but we can operate as a primitive hunter-gatherer tribe that has specialized entirely into guerrilla warfare. You see, my plan is to transform this entire map into a functional squirrel-killing death trap. My hope is that by constructing a series of elaborate devices and pitfalls, we can reduce the squirrel numbers to manageable levels before we ever have to engage them in direct combat. Naturally, this is going to take a lot of resources, and so began the great deforestation of day 1. We will repurpose every last blade of grass on this godforsaken planet as a weapon against our enemies. Oh, and I know you might be thinking, Reggie, just build a door. Squirrels can't open doors. That's correct, but much like wearing a strap-on to a bukkake party, it's just not in the spirit of the challenge. And so our rule is that the squirrels must have clear access to our colonists at all times. It doesn't have to be safe or fast, but it must be available. Now, while we have already accepted our lifestyle as filthy, dirt-eating cretins, we will still require some basic amenities to prevent our colonists from going completely insane. As such, I began construction on a tasteful bedroom, as well as was a slave labor research cave. And that was day 1. Research, wood gathering, and interior decorating, the trappings of any good genocide. But if we want to survive past day 20, our society will need to evolve into a more techno-militaristic and authoritarian regime. With my personal guidance, I think we can get there. The sun reluctantly rose again on this death world, and with some wood finally stockpiled, I had our colonists begin construction on our main defensive project. I'm not sure that it's fair to call it a maze, since it's impossible to get lost, but it's a spiral-shaped structure meant to corral enemies into a single-file line. Not overly threatening in its own right, but I installed a mod that allows me to build rat traps. They are fairly cheap, and it only takes 2 to kill a squirrel. By filling our maze with over 200 rat traps, I could guarantee our colonists some level of security, at least until we start dealing with the later waves of the Squirrel Army. This would be our primary construction project for the next few days. During this time, nestled into the side of a mountain, was my team of research scientists, furiously folding and unfolding the same piece of paper in an attempt to extract some arcane knowledge. In time, we managed to discover some basic human necessities, such as power generation and chlorine gas. I have to say, there was something relaxing about watching the colonists hard at work, bending the very planet to their will and literally draining the swamps. It is tranquil in a way that belies the reality of this holy war. Complacency would mean death, and innovation life. Our scientists understood this, and we developed a way to jerry-rig some very low-tech turrets made and fueled entirely by wood. We outfitted our base's perimeter with these turrets and also began to spray down the surrounding area with water, thus turning the battlefield into a thick, muddy mire that would slow attacking armies. By this point, food was beginning to become an issue. If we could survive for a few more weeks, we could transition to an entirely squirrel-based diet, but for the time being, we would have to survive via turtle meat and photosynthesis. Our initial arrival may have been met with sunny skies, but now rain has washed down on our base for the past 3 days. Possibly monsoon season, but also possibly an early warning sign that we are not welcome. It was maybe for this reason that I had no qualms in building toxic power generators just outside our base. Sure, it will eventually pollute the entire planet and destroy countless ecosystems, but if you shorten your time frame to 28 days, you'll realize there are a surprising amount of things that you simply don't care about. With this, our colonists transitioned from construction to mining. I studied a lot of tape on the Viet Cong in preparation for this challenge, and the development of an intricate series of tunnels was key to their success as guerrilla warriors. We too could utilize this technique, popping out of the mountain to lob explosives at our enemies before disappearing into a vast darkness. Work carried on for the next few days. The occasional raider would show up to help us test our defenses, and our colonists began to grow unhinged from their daily 2-hour horseshoe games in 40-degree weather. But as they say, life goes on. With the discovery of weapon manufacturing and artillery, our society is beginning to take form as an idiot savant of sorts. Basic sanitation and plumbing mystifies us entirely, but building a fertilizer IED is a relatively uneventful affair, and so we began to add additional layers of redundancy to our defenses. What's that? You passed the rat trap maze? Amazing! Let's celebrate with a bouquet of Mark II grenades. Even got past the grenades, huh? Let's see how you do with tight spaces filled with circular saws. Amazingly, despite these hazardous working conditions, none of our colonists have died in a freak accident, though they have certainly tried. The first wave of squirrels would soon be upon us. A certain tension fell over the colony as I began to wonder if our preparations would even come close to being adequate. It's one thing to kill a homeless man with rat traps, it's another thing entirely to stop 2,000 squirrels. My colonists finished the day in the workshop, preparing some flammable liquids and machine pistols for the coming days. The sun set and rose again, bringing with it an agent of destruction. A solitary squirrel nationalist. As expected, he didn't even make it past our turret, but the blood spilled this day has set in motion the wheels of war. A war that would not end until there was no blood left to give. Some would view this first squirrel as a kind of Franz Ferdinand, a holy martyr even. We, however, viewed him as lunch. The next few squirrel attacks progressed with without much trouble. Our colonists are awful at shooting, however their guns were designed in complete darkness by a person suffering from extreme heat stroke, so I think we're just lucky to be alive. All in all, the days were flying by, and we even managed to acquire some reinforced barrels from a traveling merchant. This would allow us to construct a small mortar battery in the back portion of our base, which would be essential to our late game defense. Day 21 was when the squirrel threat really began to register. Of the 16 attacking squirrels, several managed to make their way to our gun line, and they nearly killed Squire. For our safety, we now need to rely more and more on our extensive infrastructure of traps. This was a stressful revelation. The world was closing in on us now, and our colonists were nestled into their awkwardly designed fortress, mass-producing rat traps and fine-tuning the defenses of what might be their final stand. By noon of day 22, our next batch of enemies arrived. 32 squirrels, each one entirely intent on destroying our micronation and feasting on our flesh. I had the colonists work through this attack because it was too dangerous to directly participate. The squirrels quickly overwhelmed our turrets, but the maze made short work of them. For now, the maze would be our guardian, but our ability to replenish it was rapidly diminishing relative to their ability to destroy it. We managed to survive day 23 thanks to an incredibly unlucky trade caravan being absolutely devoured by the wave of 64 squirrels. Despite their primitive weapons, the traders managed to whittle down the attacking army to a very manageable size, which we had no problem defeating. It was also at this point that I realized we could process the dead squirrels directly into chem fuel. This became the #1 priority of the colony in addition to the basic maintenance of our exterior defenses. If I could convert hundreds of squirrels into hundreds of barrels of explosive liquid, there's no telling what we could be capable of. It is now the 8th wave of Armageddon. 128 squirrels barrel down on us like a bulldozer full of rabies. However, something strange is happening. Chunks of rock are falling from the sky and flattening our opponents. Initially, I thought it was a meteor shower, but then I remembered several days ago I had made blueprints for the construction of several catapults. I didn't even realize they had been completed, but nevertheless, they were absolutely emasculating the attacking forces. Under normal circumstances, I'm sure this is a very ineffective weapon due to its poor accuracy, but when you're dealing with this many squirrels, you really can't miss. While the squirrels managed to disarm most of our rat traps by running into them face first, we now have a new and effective weapon. Our priority now is the construction of as many catapults as humanly possible. We now have only a few days standing between us and total victory, but our base is certainly looking a little worse for wear. Aside from the attrition inflicted on our defenses, our base is covered in the rotting bodies of hundreds of squirrels. And honestly, it's starting to freak some of us out a little bit. It's not clear if the squirrels adopted this Red Army style of warfare for these psychological advantages, but regardless, it's working. Panic attacks, murderous rage, and all forms of mental disorder are becoming increasingly prevalent among our colonists. Luckily, there is a one-size-fits-all medicine for these problems. A complex series of gang initiations to return you to your senses. It was at this point I realized we are no longer growing as a colony. Rather, our development has likely peaked around day 20, and every day after that, the squirrels have been rapidly eroding our progress. Our society is in a sort of tailspin, but so is the squirrel population. The question is, which will hit zero first? Wave after wave hit our base. 256 became 512, which eventually became 1024, the second last wave of the entire challenge. Hundreds of kamikaze squirrels have left our catalog of traps dangerously thin, and I felt as though our chances of survival were low. It is now time to initiate scorched earth tactics. Just prior to the arrival of the next wave, I had King and Squire shuffle their way through the sea of corpses to the front of the base, where they lit fire to the surrounding vegetation. This would hopefully spread outward, ravaging our enemies on approach. It may also spread inward, but at this point that might actually clean the place up a bit. I also had our mortar team load high explosive and toxin-filled shells for the attack. If these rodent fucks want us dead, they'll have to be prepared to reenact the Normandy landings every day for the rest of the challenge. The squirrels approached under heavy artillery fire. They reached the outer wall, at which point they assembled into a formation known only as FPS killer. Initially, it looks like the squirrels aren't doing anything, but that's just because my game has involuntarily been put in slow motion, and the squirrel hive mind is now deciding how to best assault our defenses. Honestly, with these numbers, it doesn't really matter. The attackers washed upon us with all the grace of a ruptured sewage pipe, storming through my caltrops, surviving mineshaft collapses, and even showing surprising resilience to nerve gas. You'd think that at some point the squirrels would wise up to our traps. I mean, they're literally slowly shuffling towards them in a single file line. But much like Chinese factory workers, they are simply unable to resist launching themselves into industrial machinery. Eventually, they did manage to prop open some of our doors and circumvent many of our traps entirely. That said, they weren't without their casualties. Fire was spreading through their ranks, and as they filtered into our final defensive position, we engaged them in a razor-thin fight to the death. Fearing this might be the end, I had the remaining colonists ingest a highly potent combat drug known as luciferum. It would kill us eventually, but then again, so would the squirrels, and so we decided not to go quietly into that sweet night. For every inch of ground gained, they lost dozens to IEDs, arrow turrets, and withering gunfire. And after 21 consecutive hours of fighting, 1,024 squirrels lay defeated in various stages of our fortress. This moment is bittersweet. We survived, but our base is entirely demolished from a combination of explosions, fire, and collateral damage. Furthermore, we've used up most of our fuel and all of our munitions, and our colonists are going absolutely fucking nuts. With 3 hours left until the next wave, reality is pounding on our door, and it's time to answer. We simply won't be able to survive these next 2,000 squirrels, but we might be able to kill them. For you, my final subscribers, the best fate I can offer is a Viking funeral. We collected the remaining chem fuel from our stockpile and scattered it around this large wooden warehouse. We're going to let all the squirrels into this structure, and then we're going to lock the door. You see, the rules of this challenge state that I'm not allowed to prevent the squirrels from getting to us, but we didn't say anything about preventing them from getting away from us. Once the squirrels have entered the house, Sebi will spring out from his hiding place, closing the door and trapping 2,000 squirrels and 8 colonists in our final trap. Day 28, noon. The final wave is upon us. Survival is a thing of the past now. From here, we are concerned only with sending a message of human resilience and of hope for a better, squirrel-free world. For legal purposes, I am required to disclose that there is no subtext to what I am currently saying. I tried my best to create a funnel that would allow for maximum squirrel acquisition within our remaining moments of life. I had fashioned one last incendiary fertilizer trap and placed it in the center of the base. At this point, the 2,000 squirrels were marauding their way through our base, and eventually they started pouring into the warehouse. We gunned down all we could, but eventually the trap was triggered, igniting the inferno that would rage as a monument to the ferocity of these 10 brave men. The doors are locked, escape is impossible, and though the squirrels struck us down, I think we managed some sort of deranged moral victory through self-immolation. I'd like to observe a moment of silence for those lost today. And with that, our challenge is over. We may have lost the battle, but from what I've seen here, I think we can win the war. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I think Rimworld has exceptional creative potential, and I've even hired some modders to help me bring my drug-induced visions to life. One big shout out to our channel members and patrons, and finally, thank you for watching.